name is Leisha and I'm an addict. I'm crying already, and disclaimer, I'm probably going to cry multiple times while I'm speaking. I'm so grateful to be here, and when I arrived here I didn't even know what gratitude meant, and I definitely wasn't grateful, to be here with my fellows this weekend, you know what I mean? The excitement, the camaraderie, you know what I mean? It's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. So I suppose I'll just tell you about my life, I grew up in an extremely dysfunctional household where, both my parents were addicts and alcoholics, and, the first type of love that I ever seen was a codependent one, and I know today that I was born this way, because I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters and none of them are alcoholics or addicts, but whatever happened to me, I don't know, and I don't need to know, I suffer with this thing, and for as far long back as I can remember, I didn't feel like anybody liked me, I never felt good enough. I felt like I didn't fit in, so I had to create a persona. I had to become a chameleon. I could be around any type of people, no matter what class, race, religion you were from. I would just mold my way around you to feel loved, to feel validated, So I went out into this world, into school at a young age, just doing anything anybody wanted me to do, so that I would feel liked, and I could never process my emotions as a child. I was extremely angry all the time and sad, but I didn't know why. I didn't understand why, I couldn't process those emotions, and it would always come out as rage, usually physical. I'd be extremely physically violent from a young age, and even from the age of 5 I would be seeking outside myself. I'd go down to the local shop and rob loads of stuff, for that high, and I didn't understand. I didn't need the stuff. There were sweets. You don't need so many sweets, you know what I mean? And I was just seeking outside myself from a young age, and because I couldn't process my emotions, I started self-harming at about the age of 8, for the smallest stuff. Like, I have a memory where my mother told me stop hitting my sister, and the impulse would just make me do it for whatever reason, those not being able to process my head properly. And I hit her, and I wasn't allowed to go to Tribulgan. I remember that so specifically. And Tribulgan's a holiday village in Ireland, and I watched as they left out the window, and that's the first day I self-harmed. And I was just looking back at that little girl who thought that was the only way that she could say how she felt or process how she felt. I have so much compassion for that little girl. And long before I ever drank or used, I was a master of obsession, of fantasy, of imagination. And I'd always imagined my life to be something grander than it was, to live in a different family, to live in a different country, to be someone who I wasn't, the stars on TV, all that kind of stuff. And the day came where I drank and used, and they were probably around the same time. And for a normal 12, 13-year-old, that's extremely normal where I'm from, to go into the bushes somewhere and all drink together. And but I remember that day so significantly, because all the emotions that I bottled up in the 12, 13 years previous to that came out on that night, And I would be quite confident, so it's not like I needed the drink or the drugs for the confidence, but it helped me to say stuff I wasn't able to say, and be someone else, or be myself. I don't know, And for me, drinking and using and men came hand in hand, and it's a significant part of my story, because it was the same thing for me. I was seeking in other things, all the time, and I put myself in a lot of dangerous situations to be validated, to feel loved, to feel good enough, and I opened myself up to sexual, emotional and physical abuse, because I thought it was okay. I thought if someone was with me, then I'd feel loved, and that's all I ever wanted. And when I was 15, I got pregnant, and I decided not to go through with the pregnancy. And after that, the guilt and the shame that I felt, I think that's when my drinking and using really kicked off, because I was using to really kill off something inside me that, I didn't understand. And I was in a lot of pain, and I couldn't tell people about it, and my parents were really supportive, but I couldn't tell my peers about it. I couldn't talk with someone who could relate to me about how I was feeling. And you may think that I might have learned my lesson, but a year later I got pregnant again on my daughter, and she's 10 today. And I drank and used the majority of the way through my pregnancy. I drank in the pubs till I was 6 months pregnant, until I was so big, it looked out of place for me to be there. But I used up until the night that she was born, and thereafter. And when the day she was born, I didn't feel that connection that you would think that a mother is supposed to feel, and it's true what they say, that addiction is stronger than the maternal instinct, any day of the week. And when I look back now, I always felt so much guilt and shame about that moment. Like, why? I'm supposed to be a mother. I'm supposed to feel this love for my child, and it just wasn't there. I felt resentment. I felt overwhelmed. I felt like my life had been taken away from me, and I'd been given this responsibility that I didn't know how to care for. And thank God for my mother in particular, who I basically handed that child over to, and was like, I'm off. And any opportunity I got, I was gone, and I started suffering with really bad depression and postnatal depression after that, and where I would just stay in bed, all the time. I would just sleep to escape. It was another massive thing for me, was to sleep to escape. And it became really evident at that time that there was a serious problem. I always knew that there was something wrong, but I wanted it to be bipolar. I wanted it to be schizophrenia. I wanted it to be something, but I'd never associated drinking and drugs with what I suffered from, and I always wanted to know, but I just, I never connected the two for whatever reason. And I tried everything. I tried yoga, fucking self-help retreats, meditation, all this kind of stuff, but it just wasn't doing it for me, I wanted a different way. And I had tried one or two meetings, because my dad was in recovery when I was a child, and no offense, I'd never associated recovery with ultimate wellness, the wellness that I see today in our lives. Do you know what I mean? The wellness that I know that we have today, the spirituality that I know we have today, I never associated the two, and I went to AA, and I went to one or two meetings, and I thought, if I stay here, my life is over, how can I sit in here with all these old men and you know what I mean, drink tea of a Saturday night, It didn't fit what I wanted at the time, and off I went again. And there was periods over the space of 2 years where I'd went to a couple of meetings, and in the meantime, my dad had come back using it, and my family home had self-destructed really, and what was to ensue in the next 5 or 6 years was I'd become someone that I just never imagined. I did things I never imagined I'd do. Selling drugs, being in court, house raided, you know what I mean? Lying, cheating, stealing, manipulating. I was a master of them all, and it wasn't the person that I wanted to be, but it was like they were my survival instincts. They were the only thing that I knew to get through this world, and I didn't know that there was another way. And in the meantime, both my parents had got sober and found true recovery, and there was, I had to make a choice. I came to a crossroads in my life where my parents weren't willing to enable me anymore, They couldn't watch me kill myself. And I had to choose between drinking and using or my family. And if I had any morals instilled in me as a child, is that, family is the most important thing, and I felt nothing without them. So I chose to get some help, and CA wasn't massive. There was no CA. I think there was one CA meeting where I'm from at the time, and I didn't really know about it. So I went back to AA, and I actually started to enjoy it. You know, I was, you know, I met a couple of people my own age and I was like, this is great. We're bombing around meetings, you know, drinking coffees and all this kind of stuff. But I did everything you shouldn't do when you come into recovery, you know, everything. And I was kind of relapsing like periodically, maybe, you know, one night every 2 weeks for over the span of 3 months. And I went on a date the night of my final relapse, and I thought I would just get away with not drinking on this date, you know. But I was to be fooled by myself, and you know, half an hour in, I was 5 cocktails deep, and another half an hour later, I was driving to get a bag of Coke, you know. And that night, all the psychosis that I thought I was kind of after coming away from, and all the paranoia and all the anxiety and all that depression, it hit me with one bang. And you know, I didn't talk to the guy for hours. I was just sitting there, and the thing, you know, that thing when you're sitting there and your eyes are pinned in the back of your head, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? If I speak, this will happen. If it is, you know. And I got a taxi home at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that weekend there was a convention on in Cork, and all my friends had went to it, and I arrived home on the Saturday morning, and I rang a member who's my neighbour, and I said, please bring me with you, you know, I can't do this anymore. I was broken, you know. I was still, even as we arrived at the convention, I was still coming down, like I was rattled. I had barely done my face up, and I was just like, you know, a ball of anxiety basically going in there. And everyone wrapped their arms around me and let me know that it was going to be okay. And I just decided that day I needed to do something that I wasn't doing before, or ask myself, what am I not doing that these people are doing, you know? And that became clear that these people were working a 12-step program in their life, and I wasn't. So I rang a lady to actually knew if she knew anybody who'd be my sponsor, and she said, well, are you asking me or what? So, you know, I took that opportunity. She had 25 years sobriety, and she was a stern woman, no bullshit, and that's what I fucking needed, you know. And she took me through the process of the 12 steps, and I turned up to her house the same way I turned up to the drug dealer's house or the offie house, with the book in hand, ready to go. And I had this willingness that I didn't have before, out of pure fear, out of nothing else but fear, that I would go back to that moment in my final relapse. And I struggled with the God stuff, you know. I did for a long time, because I didn't grow up in a Catholic household. I wasn't, you know, baptized as a child, so it wasn't a thing. Religion wasn't a thing in my house. And you know, my mother used to tell us that we were pagans, and I knew about the universe, like, you know, I knew about the universe, and I knew about that stuff, and I knew my parents prayed. I didn't know what to, I never had asked them, but I knew that there was something out there, and I really thought people were bullshitting when they were saying that they have this connection to the higher power. I was like, they're spoofing, that they do not go in and they do not get down on their knees every day to pray to something that I don't even know whether it exists or not. But these people had something I didn't, so I had that willingness to believe, you know. And something just happened to me over the process of going through the 12 steps of recovery. A spiritual experience, one might call it. And I had multiple, where there was no coincidences. There was no way it could have been anything. There was no way it was me anyway, you know, and there was no way it was another human power. You know, it had to be coming from somewhere else. And I just trusted in that, you know. And I got the opportunity to make amends with my family, you know, and to people I'd really hurt, you know, because I always thought everyone else was the problem. I really, really thought it was all the men, it was all my friends, it was my family who turned me this way. I used to say, like, it's not my fault I'm this way, it's theirs. I'd finally take responsibility for who I'd become. And then I was to find CA, you know, where I met, you know, the most amazing people. I can't even describe it. It's, you know, I met people who are true friends and didn't want anything from me, because everybody I'd always met in my life, they always wanted something from me, you know. When I came in here, I was unemployable, you know. I didn't have the capacity to be friends with anybody or be kind, you know. And these people taught me that, you know. My sponsor loved me back to life, and I was to find a God of my own understanding. But, you know, I think a year, maybe a year and a half into recovery, I started to suffer with depression again. You know, I wasn't drinking, I wasn't using, I was doing service, I was sponsoring, I was doing it all, but I started to suffer with this depression that lasted me months, you know. And I was questioning, I was like, maybe this recovery thing is like, do you know, maybe it doesn't work. Well, why am I still feeling this way? And I went kind of searching. I stood my ground, and I knew this is where I was supposed to be. I knew this is where I wanted to be. And I got some outside help and stuff like that. And, you know, I was given the gift of, you know, the two-way prayer and, you know, starting the emotional sobriety workbook, because I started to realise, like, that when I put down the drink and drugs, I'm left with myself, you know. I can hand my life over to God, I can look at my defects, but there's something emotionally inside me that's unstable, you know, and I had to look at that, and I had to, you know, I didn't know how to pray when I got here. I didn't even know, like, what prayers there were really, like, I didn't know what you'd say, so I asked the member, I was like, so what prayers do you say, you know? And I was just mounting off the 3rd step prayer, the 7th step prayer, all these prayers. And I was like, you know, I never kind of meant any of it, you know. And there was long periods of time where I wouldn't get down on my knees. I was like, I'm getting away with this now. Like, I'm getting away with this. Like, all those people, they can pray over there, but I'm getting away with it. And I was to quickly learn that I wasn't getting away with it. I needed to really connect and pray with intent, you know, truly pray with intent. And I didn't understand that at the time. I really didn't. And I got the opportunity to make amends to my daughter. And I can say this with honesty, I don't think that shame and guilt will never be relieved from me. It won't. And I know I've tried all the ways to let it go but I know that if I just turn up every day and do this, you know, that I'll be fine. You know, I'll be okay. Like, I know I've learned that most days are fucking shit days, you know. I'm suffering with a head that tells me I'm not good enough and, you know, I'll never amount to anything and all this kind of stuff. But today, sorry, now I'm going to take a drink. Today I know some things and I believe some things, you know. I believe that I wouldn't have gotten sober if it wasn't for, number one, God, but my parents, and particularly my dad, breaking that chain of sobriety within my of addiction within my family, you know, because it destroyed us all at one stage, you know, it really did. And I've watched people drop around us, really, you know, and I count myself so lucky, do you know? Like, even within our own fellowship at home, like, people are really suffering, you know. And there's something so special about CA, because no offence to the other fellowships, but, you know, I was in them all, and there's something special here. When I walk into a room of CA, it doesn't matter where it is in the world, I walk into a convention, I know I'm with my people. I know I'm not being judged, you know, and that's what I've searched for my whole life, you know, is to feel like I belong, you know. So I'm really grateful. I don't know how long I talked for now, and I don't know what I said, but I'm truly grateful to be here. I can't imagine what my life would be like if I was still doing what I'm doing. I probably wouldn't be alive, to be honest, and not from drinking and using. I probably would have took myself out because I couldn't handle what was going on inside my head at any given day, you know. I was suicidal all the time. Even if it was just a gnawing voice in the back of my head, I was suicidal. And it's given me the opportunity to be a mother, to be a friend, to be a daughter, to be all the things I always wanted to be. I'm reliable, I'm responsible, I turn up to my job, you know, I pay my bills, you know. I never thought that was possible. It's the simple things. I don't need houses on the mansions on the hills. I don't need a fucking Range Rover outside the front door. I don't need any of that stuff. It's the simple things that normal people is just normal stuff to them that I'm grateful for every day, you know. I'm truly blessed, and I hope I can pass this on to as many people as possible, because the experience of the 12 step has been probably the most rewarding out of all of them, I think, you know. Because our fellowship is extremely small. When I got there was 2 women who were through the work, you know. There was probably only another 2 women, you know, and now we're overtaking the lads, I would say, and you know, and I know, and we're really pushing it, because there's a lot of people suffering where we're from, you know, and all over, I'm sure, but you know, there's a lot of people suffering, and the more people we can pass this message on to, the more people are within having a chance, you know. So I'm truly grateful to be here today. I don't know how long I talk for now, lads, but because that was just a whirlwind. But yeah, I'm grateful that Frank asked me to do this, because you know, as I was sitting down, I was so trying to listen to everybody else. I did about 10 fucking chairs in my head. But I know that God spoke through me today, you know, and I hope somebody heard something that they might take for themselves or take for somebody else, you know. The opportunity to be selfless, even when I don't want to, you know, is one of the greatest ones. To think about others, you know. And I think I have that today, you know. I was the most selfish, self-centered prick on the planet. I was trying to think of a nice word, but on the planet, you know. And like Jodie said, I'd like to think today that I'm proud of the woman that I am. You know, it's so beautiful to see my family proud of me, you know. Yeah. Sorry, now I'm thinking about my family. That's what I'm doing, because they're the ones who suffered, you know. Not just for me, but from addiction as a whole, you know, who suffered from this. And oh, yeah, this has been a beautiful opportunity. So thank you so much, Frank, and I'm going to leave it there.